The hallways of Riverside University fell quiet as evening approached. Most students had left for the day, heading back to their dorms or apartments while professors wrapped up their work in dimly lit offices. The grand old mathematics building, with its polished wooden floors and walls covered in framed photographs of famous mathematicians, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the day's hustle faded away. In this peaceful twilight hour, Fatima Khan moved silently through the corridors, pushing her cleaning cart ahead of her. At 45, her face showed the gentle lines of a life filled with hard work and quiet perseverance. Her dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back in a practical bun, and her movements were efficient as she emptied trash bins and wiped down surfaces. Fatima had been working as part of the cleaning staff at Riverside for 3 years now. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and offered stability, something she had learned to value highly after a life of unpredictable turns. What her colleagues and the university staff didn't know was that Fatima harbored a secret passion that made the humble job far more rewarding than anyone could have guessed. "Good evening, Mrs. Khan," called Professor Chen as he stepped out of his office, briefcase in hand. "Good evening, sir," Fatima replied with a warm smile.
Heading home for the night?
"Yes, finally. These end-of-semester papers won't grade themselves, unfortunately." He chuckled, then paused. "Don't work too late yourself." "I won't, sir. Have a good night." As the professor's footsteps faded down the hallway, Fatima continued her work, moving toward the large lecture hall at the end of the corridor. This was her favorite room in the entire building, not because it was easier to clean or more comfortable, but because of what happened inside it. 3 times a week, Professor Williams taught his advanced calculus course in this hall. And 3 times a week, Fatima would time her cleaning schedule perfectly so she could work in the adjacent rooms. The door cracked just enough for her to hear his lectures. Tonight, the lecture hall was empty, but the whiteboard still contained the day's lesson. Complex equations and diagrams spread across its surface like a foreign language. To most people, it would have looked like meaningless scribbles. To Fatima, it was poetry. She set down her cleaning supplies and stepped closer to the board, her eyes tracing the lines of an equation. Numbers had always made sense to her, even as a child in her small village outside Lahore. Her father, a shopkeeper with a 6th-grade education, had noticed her talent when she would help him keep the accounts, calculating complex totals in her head faster than he could write them down. "You have a gift," he had told her, pride shining in his eyes. "You must study hard and become something great." Life, however, had other plans. Family responsibilities, limited resources, and the expectations placed on girls in her community all conspired to push Fatima away from formal education. By 18, she was married. By 20, she had her first child. By 25, she had immigrated to America with her husband and 2 children, dreams of university long forgotten, but the love for numbers never left her. In quiet moments between cooking meals and caring for her family, she would solve puzzles in newspapers, devour any math book she could find at the local library, and later, watch online lectures when her children introduced her to the internet. Standing before the whiteboard now, Fatima felt the familiar pull of curiosity. The equation seemed to be part of a differential problem, something she had been teaching herself lately through free online courses. She glanced around the empty room, then picked up an eraser and cleared a small section of the board. Taking a marker, she began working through the problem, her hand moving confidently across the smooth surface. "This variable needs to be isolated," she murmured to herself, lost in the rhythm of calculation. "Then if we apply the chain rule here." Time slipped away as Fatima worked, the world narrowing down to just her and the numbers. This was her private joy, these stolen moments with mathematics that no one knew about. When she finished solving the problem, she stepped back to admire her work, a smile playing on her lips. Then, realizing how much time had passed, she quickly erased her calculations and returned to her cleaning cart. No one would ever know about her mathematical adventures in empty classrooms after hours. Who would believe that a cleaning lady could understand advanced calculus anyway? As she moved through her evening routine, Fatima could hear voices coming from the faculty lounge down the hall. The mathematics department was having their end-of-semester gathering, a tradition she had observed each term. Professors and graduate students would gather for refreshments and informal discussions about their research, and the upcoming break. Normally, Fatima would avoid cleaning near these gatherings, not wanting to disturb the academics. But tonight the trash bins in that section needed emptying, and she couldn't leave them until morning. Taking a deep breath, she pushed her cart toward the lounge, hoping to slip in and out unnoticed. The room was warm and lively when she entered, filled with about 20 people engaged in animated conversations. A table of refreshment sat in the corner, and clusters of professors and students stood about, some discussing equations scribbled on napkins, others laughing over shared jokes. "Excuse me," Fatima said softly as she maneuvered her cart around the edge of the room toward the trash bins. Most people barely glanced her way, continuing their conversations without pause. This was normal. She had long ago grown accustomed to being nearly invisible in these academic spaces. It wasn't personal. It was simply that in their eyes she existed in a completely different world than theirs. As she emptied the first bin, she couldn't help overhearing the conversation happening just a few feet away. Professor Williams, whose lectures she enjoyed so much, was standing with a group of graduate students near the whiteboard that occupied one wall of the lounge. "I still think there's an elegant solution we're missing," he was saying, gesturing to an equation written on the board. "We've been approaching this all wrong for weeks." Fatima recognized the problem immediately. It was from a research paper Professor Williams had mentioned in his lecture last week, a particularly challenging differential equation with applications in climate modeling. "Maybe we need fresh eyes," suggested a young woman with glasses. "I've been staring at it so long I'm dreaming about partial derivatives." The group laughed and Fatima smiled to herself as she continued working. She understood their frustration. That particular type of equation had given her trouble too, until she had discovered an approach in an old textbook she'd found at a thrift store. As she moved to the next bin, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible, her cart bumped against a chair, causing a small clatter. Several heads turned in her direction. "Sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by the attention. A tall graduate student with an expensive-looking sweater gave her a dismissive glance before turning back to the group. "As I was saying before the interruption, I think the traditional methods are failing us here because maybe the cleaning lady knows the answer," another student cut in with a smirk. "Should we ask her?" A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the group. Professor Williams frowned slightly but didn't say anything. Fatima kept her eyes down, her cheeks burning as she quickly finished emptying the trash. She was used to occasional comments like these, little reminders of how people saw her. Usually she let them roll off her back. After all, what did it matter what they thought? Her love of mathematics wasn't for them to understand or validate. Yet tonight, as she glanced at the equation that had them all stumped, an equation she suspected she could solve, something stirred inside her. A mixture of indignation and determination that made her pause instead of hurrying out of the room as she normally would. "I mean, why not?" the same student continued, emboldened by the laughter. "We've tried everything else." He turned toward Fatima with an exaggerated gesture. "Excuse me, ma'am, any chance you could help us with this impossible math problem?" More laughter followed, but it died quickly when Fatima looked up and met his gaze directly. The room grew quiet. Fatima stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment when she usually would smile politely and walk away, continuing the charade that had become so comfortable over the years. The safe choice, the expected choice. But tonight, standing in that room full of brilliant minds who couldn't see past her uniform, Fatima thought of her father's words from so long ago. "You have a gift." And for the first time in decades, she decided it was time to unwrap it. Little did anyone in that room know that their casual joke was about to backfire in the most unexpected way. The humble woman they barely noticed was about to change everything, starting with that impossible equation on the board. The lounge fell silent as Fatima took a step toward the whiteboard. The student who had made the joke, a young man named David with styled hair and an expensive watch, looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He hadn't expected her to actually respond to his challenge. "I'm sorry," Professor Williams said, stepping forward with a kind but dismissive smile. "Please don't feel like you have to humor them. These graduate students sometimes forget." Hard the marker that another student was holding. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. What was she thinking? These people had years of formal education, advanced degrees, published papers. She cleaned their offices and emptied their trash. But then she remembered the countless hours she'd spent with these same equations, the way her mind had always worked through problems that others found difficult, the joy she felt when a solution clicked into place like the tumblers of a lock. "I would like to try," she said quietly but firmly, "if that's okay." The room remained silent, but the atmosphere shifted from mockery to curiosity, with a healthy dose of skepticism mixed in. The student reluctantly handed her the marker. Fatima stepped up to the whiteboard, studying the complex differential equation that had apparently stumped the department for weeks. It was related to fluid dynamics, something she had been reading about in an old textbook she'd found in the university library's discard pile. She took a deep breath, uncapped the marker, and began to write. At first, she could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting for her to make a mistake or give up. She could almost hear their thoughts. "This poor woman. She has no idea what she's looking at." But as soon as the marker touched the board, the rest of the room faded away. It was just her and the numbers now, dancing together in that familiar rhythm that had been her private joy for so long. She started by rewriting the equation in a slightly different form, using a substitution technique she had learned from one of Professor Williams's lectures. Her hand moved steadily, her writing neat and precise despite her racing heart. Behind her, someone whispered, "What is she doing?" Another voice shushed them. Fatima continued step by step, breaking down the complex problem into smaller pieces. She applied a method she had discovered in that thrift store textbook, an approach that wasn't commonly taught anymore, but that she had found elegant and intuitive. As she worked, she found herself whispering parts of the solution aloud, a habit from her late-night study sessions at her small kitchen table after her children had gone to bed. "If we substitute this variable here, then apply the chain rule, now we can see the pattern emerging." Minutes ticked by. 5, 10. The room remained silent except for the squeak of the marker against the whiteboard and Fatima's occasional murmurs. She filled the board with calculations, crossing out failed approaches and circling promising ones, just as she had seen the professors do in their lectures. When she ran out of space on the right side of the board, she moved to the left, continuing her work without breaking her concentration. The problem was challenging, yes, but it was also familiar, like a puzzle with pieces that wanted to fit together if only you could see the right pattern. And Fatima could see the pattern. As she neared the end of her calculation, she felt it, that rush of clarity that came when all the pieces aligned. The solution was revealing itself to her, elegant and undeniable. With a few final strokes of the marker, she wrote out the answer and circled it twice. Only then did she step back from the board, suddenly aware again of the room full of people behind her. Fatima turned around, the marker still in her hand, to find every face staring at her in disbelief. For a long, uncomfortable moment, nobody spoke. Fatima's confidence began to waver. Had she made a mistake? Misunderstood the problem? Made a fool of herself? Professor Williams was the first to move. He stepped forward, his eyes moving rapidly between Fatima and the board, tracing her work with growing amazement. He checked one step, then another, then followed the logic through to her conclusion. "This is," he began, then stopped, shaking his head slightly. "This approach? I've never seen it applied to this type of problem before." He turned to face her directly, his expression a mixture of confusion and respect. "Where did you learn this method, Mrs. Khan?" All eyes were on her now, but the looks had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by something new, something Fatima hadn't experienced in these hallways before. It looked like recognition. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I listen to your lectures sometimes while I clean, and I read books when I can find them. Old textbooks people throw away." David, the student who had made the joke, stepped forward to examine her work more closely. His face had gone pale. "But this is..." He looked at Professor Williams. "She solved it." "She actually solved it." "Not just solved it," the professor replied, still studying the board. "She found an elegant solution using a variation of the Peterson method that I don't think has been applied to fluid dynamics before." He turned to Fatima, his brow furrowed. "You developed this approach yourself?" Fatima nodded, her hands now clasped tightly in front of her. The regular methods weren't working. I remembered something from an old book about similar problems in thermodynamics, so I tried adapting it. A young woman with curly hair and glasses stepped forward. That's brilliant, she said, her voice tinged with genuine admiration. We've been stuck on this for weeks, trying every conventional approach. Professor Williams was still examining the solution, tracing the steps with his finger. The substitution here is particularly inspired, he murmured almost to himself. Then louder. Mrs. Khan, how long have you been interested in mathematics? Fatima felt a lump forming in her throat. How long? Since she was a little girl counting mangoes in her father's shop. Since she would solve arithmetic puzzles faster than her teachers could create them. Since before life took her down a different path than the one she had dreamed of. Always, she said simply. I've always loved numbers. The room had transformed. The end of semester gathering was forgotten, as students and professors alike crowded around the board, examining Fatima's work, discussing the implications of her approach, asking her questions about her reasoning. For the first time they were seeing her, really seeing her, not as the invisible woman who cleaned their offices, but as a mind, a mathematician. David approached her, his earlier smugness replaced by genuine contrition. Mrs. Khan, I owe you an apology, he said, looking her in the eye. What I said was disrespectful and, well, I was wrong. Clearly very wrong. Fatima offered him a small smile. It's okay. You didn't know. None of us knew, Professor Williams said, joining them. And that's our failure, not yours. He extended his hand to her. Thank you for sharing your gift with us tonight. Mrs. Khan, I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a very interesting conversation. As Fatima shook his hand, she felt something shift inside her, like a door long locked had finally been opened. For years she had kept her passion for mathematics private, a secret joy that belonged only to her, but now that it was in the open, now that others could see what she had always known about herself, she felt both terrified and exhilarated. What would happen next? Would anything really change? Or would they all go back to their normal roles tomorrow? The professors to their lectures, the students to their studies, and Fatima to her cleaning cart and invisible existence. As if reading her thoughts, Professor Williams smiled warmly. Would you be willing to come to my office tomorrow? I think we should discuss how the university might support your mathematical studies more formally. The curly-haired student chimed in. And I'd love to get your input on my research project if you'd be interested. It involves some of the same principles you just applied. Another professor who had been quietly observing stepped forward. Mrs. Khan, may I ask, have you ever considered pursuing a degree in mathematics? The questions continued, each one opening a new possibility that Fatima had long ago stopped allowing herself to imagine. For the first time in decades, she let herself wonder, what if? As the evening wore on, the gathering gradually returned to its original purpose, but with Fatima now included in the conversations rather than moving silently around them. She found herself in a circle of graduate students, discussing approaches to problems she had only ever worked on alone at her kitchen table. And when she finally left the building that night, long after her shift had ended, Fatima walked with her head held higher than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explanations to her family, decisions about what opportunities to pursue, and the inevitable adjustments that would come with stepping into a new role at the university. But tonight, for the first time when Fatima Khan looked up at the stars, she didn't just see their beauty, she saw equations, patterns, and possibilities, and they had never seemed more within her reach. The next morning, Fatima sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chai, trying to process everything that had happened the night before. The kitchen was quiet. Now, the only sound was the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional car passing by outside. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the moment when Professor Williams had asked her to come to his office today. What did he want to discuss? Would he offer her some small token position, a pat on the head for her clever trick, or worse? Had they discovered some fatal flaw in her solution overnight, and now he wanted to gently let her know that she had embarrassed herself after all? Fatima sipped her chai, the familiar spices comforting her anxious thoughts. No, she was sure her solution was correct. The mathematics had spoken to her clearly, as it always did. Still, as she got dressed for work that morning, she chose her nicest uniform, the one she usually saved for special occasions. She spent extra time on her hair, making sure every strand was neatly in place. Whatever happened in Professor Williams' office today, she would face it with dignity. The campus looked different somehow as she walked through it that morning. Or perhaps it was her perspective that had changed. Students passed by, clutching coffee cups and backpacks, hurrying to early classes. Had she become visible to them overnight? Or was she still just part of the background, like the trees and benches that dotted the pathways? When she reached the mathematics building, Fatima went straight to the supply closet to collect her cleaning cart, just as she did every morning. Routine was comforting, and she had 2 floors to clean before her meeting with the professor. "Mrs. Khan, there you are." Fatima turned to see Lisa, the curly-haired graduate student from last night, hurrying toward her with a bright smile. "I've been telling everyone about what happened last night," Lisa said, slightly out of breath. "Professor Williams called an emergency department meeting first thing this morning. They're all talking about your solution." Fatima's heart skipped a beat. "An emergency meeting? About me?" Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "About your approach to the equation. Professor Williams thinks it could have applications beyond what we were originally working on." She paused, studying Fatima's face. "Are you okay? You look worried." "I'm fine," Fatima said automatically, though her stomach was doing flips. "Just surprised, I guess." "Well, get ready for more surprises," Lisa said with a grin. "I don't think things are going to be the same around here anymore." As Lisa hurried off to her class, Fatima stood still for a moment, her hand resting on the cleaning cart. Then, with a deep breath, she pushed it toward the elevator. Work first. Worrying could come later. She had just finished cleaning the second-floor bathrooms when her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her supervisor, asking her to come to the administrative office right away. This had never happened before. In 3 years of working at the university, Fatima had rarely interacted with anyone in administration. Had someone complained about her? Was she in trouble for participating in the faculty gathering last night instead of just cleaning quietly? With a growing sense of unease, Fatima made her way to the administrative office on the first floor. When she entered, she was surprised to see not only her supervisor but also Dean Thompson, the head of the science department, and Professor Williams himself. "Mrs. Khan, please come in," the dean said, rising from his chair to greet her. "Thank you for joining us." Fatima stood awkwardly just inside the doorway, still wearing her cleaning uniform, feeling out of place among these well-dressed academics. "Please, sit down," Professor Williams said, gesturing to an empty chair. His kind smile helped ease some of her tension. As she sat, her supervisor spoke up. "Mrs. Khan, Professor Williams has been telling us about what happened last night at the mathematics department gathering." Fatima nodded cautiously. "I hope I didn't overstep. Professor Williams interrupted with a laugh. "Mrs. Khan, you solved a problem that has had our entire department stumped for weeks. And not just solved it. You approached it in a way none of us had considered." "We've been reviewing your work this morning," the dean added. "Professor Williams called in several colleagues, and they all agree. Your solution is not only correct but innovative." Fatima felt warmth spreading through her chest at their words, but she still wasn't sure why she had been called to this meeting. "Thank you," she said simply. "The thing is, Mrs. Khan," her supervisor continued, "we're wondering why someone with your mathematical abilities is working as a member of our cleaning staff." The question hung in the air. Fatima looked down at her hands, calloused from years of hard work. How could she explain the complex tapestry of circumstances that had led her here? The lack of opportunities in her home country for a girl from a poor family. The responsibilities of raising children in a new country. The need to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. "Life takes unexpected turns," she said finally, looking up to meet their eyes. "I always loved mathematics, but I never had the chance for formal education beyond high school." Professor Williams leaned forward. "And if you were given that chance now?" Fatima blinked, not sure she had heard him correctly. "I'm sorry." "Mrs. Khan," the dean said, "what Professor Williams and I would like to propose is a rather unconventional arrangement. We believe your mathematical talent deserves to be developed and supported. We want to offer you a place in our special admission program for non-traditional students," Professor Williams explained. It would allow you to pursue a degree in mathematics while working at the university. Fatima's heart began to race. A degree? But I don't have the qualifications. Based on what we saw last night, you have more than the necessary qualifications, Professor Williams assured her. You would need to take placement tests, of course, but I have no doubt you would excel. And the university is prepared to offer you a modified work schedule, her supervisor added. You could continue to work part-time in a different role, perhaps as a department assistant while taking classes. Fatima sat very still, trying to absorb what they were saying. After decades of pushing her dreams aside, of stealing moments with mathematics in the quiet hours of the night, they were offering her a chance to step into a world she had only observed from the outside. I don't know what to say, she whispered, emotion making it difficult to speak. Say you'll consider it, the dean suggested gently. Talk it over with your family. This would be a significant change. A significant change. Yes, it certainly would be. Fatima thought of her husband, who had always supported her love of learning, of her children, who had grown up watching her study in whatever spare moments she could find. What would they think of their mother becoming a student at her age? There would be challenges, Professor Williams acknowledged as if reading her thoughts. But you wouldn't be alone. We would provide mentoring, support, whatever you need to succeed. And your solution to yesterday's problem? The dean added. Professor Williams thinks it might be publishable. That alone could open doors for you in the academic world. Publishable, her work, in a mathematical journal. The idea was so far beyond anything Fatima had ever allowed herself to imagine that she almost wanted to laugh. Instead, she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. I will need to discuss this with my family, she said carefully. But, yes, I would like to consider it. The smiles that greeted her response were warm and genuine. They spent the next hour discussing details, what the program would entail, how her work schedule might change, what support would be available to her. By the time Fatima left the office, her head was spinning with possibilities that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. As she walked back to her cleaning cart, she passed the lecture hall where she had spent so many hours listening through a cracked door. Today, a class was in session. Students bent over notebooks as a professor explained a concept at the board. For a moment, Fatima allowed herself to imagine sitting among them, not as an invisible observer, but as a student, asking questions, taking tests, being seen. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. When she got home that evening, her husband Yusuf was already there, preparing dinner in their small kitchen. The familiar scent of his chicken curry filled the apartment. You're late today, he said, looking up with a smile as she entered. Then his expression changed as he noticed the look on her face. What happened? Is everything okay? Fatima set her bag down and moved to the kitchen table, her legs suddenly feeling weak. I need to tell you something, she said. Something happened at work yesterday. And today. Today they offered me a chance to study mathematics, to get a degree. Yusuf turned off the stove and came to sit across from her, his eyes wide with surprise. A degree? How? What happened? So she told him everything, the equation, the joke, her moment of courage, and the aftermath. As she spoke, she watched his expression change from surprise to pride to something like wonder. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hands in his. Fatima, he said softly, all these years, I've watched you study on your own, solving problems in those old books you collect. I always knew you were brilliant, but now others can see it too. But what about our life, our plans? She asked. This would change everything, Yusuf. As they sat together in their small kitchen, discussing how they might rearrange their lives to accommodate this new opportunity, Fatima felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead would not be easy. She had decades of formal education to catch up on, a new role to grow into, a balance to find between work, study, and family. But for the first time, the future stretched before her like an open road rather than a narrow hallway, and she was ready to take the first step. 6 weeks later, Fatima stood outside the door of Lecture Hall B, clutching her textbooks to her chest. Students half her age streamed past her, laughing and chatting as they entered the room for the first day of advanced calculus. She remained frozen in place, suddenly unable to take that final step through the doorway. What am I doing here? The thought came unbidden, along with a wave of doubt so strong it made her stomach clench. This had all happened too fast. The placement tests, which she had passed with flying colors, the registration process, the financial aid forms, the new schedule that had her working as a department assistant in the mornings and attending classes in the afternoons. You belong here, she whispered to herself, echoing the words Professor Williams had said to her just yesterday during their mentoring session. You've earned your place. Taking a deep breath, Fatima stepped through the doorway. The lecture hall looked different from this angle. Instead of seeing it from the doorway while pushing a cleaning cart, she was walking down the center aisle, looking for a seat among the rows of desks. Some students glanced up as she passed, their expressions curious but not unkind. She felt conspicuously older, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands bearing the marks of years of physical labor that these young people had never known. Fatima chose a seat in the middle section, not too close to the front, which felt too exposed, but not in the back either, which felt too much like hiding. As she arranged her notebook and pencils on the desk, a young woman slid into the seat beside her. Hi, the student said with a friendly smile. I'm Priya. Are you new to the department? I don't think I've seen you before. Fatima returned the smile, feeling some of her tension ease. Yes, I'm new. My name is Fatima. This is my first day as a student. Before Priya could respond, the door at the front of the lecture hall opened, and Professor Williams walked in. The room quieted as he set his materials on the desk and turned to face the class. Good afternoon, everyone, he began. Welcome to Advanced Calculus. Before we dive into the syllabus, I'd like to take a moment to introduce a new member of our academic community. Fatima felt her cheeks grow warm as Professor Williams' gaze found her in the crowd. Some of you may recognize Mrs. Fatima Khan, who until recently was a member of our university's cleaning staff, he continued. What most of you don't know is that Mrs. Khan is one of the most naturally gifted mathematicians I've encountered in my 20 years of teaching. A murmur ran through the room as students turned to look at her. Fatima kept her eyes steady on Professor Williams, drawing strength from his confidence in her. Last semester, Mrs. Khan solved a complex differential equation that had stumped our department for weeks, and she did it using an innovative approach that is now being reviewed for publication in the Journal of Applied Mathematics. The murmurs grew louder. Beside her, Priya's eyes widened with surprise and admiration. Mrs. Khan is joining our program through the non-traditional student pathway, and I expect all of you to welcome her as the valuable colleague she is, Professor Williams concluded. Now let's talk about what you can expect from this course. As the professor launched into his overview of the syllabus, Fatima gradually relaxed into her seat. The introduction had been uncomfortable but also validating. Professor Williams hadn't just acknowledged her presence, he had established her credibility in front of her peers. For the next hour, Fatima took detailed notes, her pencil flying across the page as Professor Williams explained the course objectives and expectations. The material was challenging but familiar. Much of it she had already taught herself during those quiet evenings at her kitchen table. When class ended, several students approached her, curious about her story and her mathematical background. Fatima answered their questions as simply as she could, still uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but touched by their genuine interest. That's amazing, one young man said after she explained how she had learned calculus by listening to lectures while cleaning. I can barely understand this stuff with full access to the classes and textbooks. Everyone learns differently, Fatima replied with a small smile. I've always seen patterns in numbers. They speak to me in a way that makes sense. As the crowd around her thinned, Priya lingered. A few of us usually study together at the library on Thursday evenings, she said. Would you like to join us? We could learn a lot from you. Learn from her. The idea that these bright young students with their formal education might want to learn from her was still hard to grasp. But Fatima nodded, grateful for the invitation. Yes, I would like that. Thank you. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Mornings in the mathematics department office, filing papers and assisting professors. A far cry from her cleaning duties, but still requiring adjustment. Afternoons in classes where she soaked up knowledge like a sponge, filling the formal gaps in her self-taught education. Evenings divided between homework and family time, with Yusuf taking on more household responsibilities to support her studies. There were challenges, of course. Some professors were less welcoming than Professor Williams, skeptical of her unconventional background. Some concepts that had never been part of her self-education required extra hours of study to master, and there were practical difficulties. The cost of textbooks, the logistics of her new schedule, the physical exhaustion that came from such intense mental work after years of physical labor. But there were triumphs too. Her first perfect score on an exam, the moment when she helped a younger student understand a complex theorem during a study session, the day Professor Williams showed her the acceptance letter from the Journal of Applied Mathematics, confirming that her solution would be published under her name. "Your life has changed so much," Lisa commented one afternoon as they worked together in the department office, organizing files for the upcoming semester. Lisa had become both a friend and a mentor, helping Fatima navigate the unfamiliar waters of academic life. Fatima paused, considering this. "Yes and no," she said finally. "My circumstances have changed. My daily tasks have changed. But inside I am still the same person who has always loved mathematics. The difference is that now others can see what was always there." Lisa smiled. "Well, I'm glad we can all see it now. The department has been buzzing about your paper since the journal accepted it. Do you realize what this means for your future?" Fatima shook her head slightly. She tried not to think too far ahead, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of each day. The idea of a future in mathematics still felt fragile, like a dream that might dissolve if examined too closely. "It means doors will open," Lisa continued. "Research opportunities, academic conferences, maybe even teaching positions eventually. You're establishing yourself as a mathematician, Fatima, not just a student, but a contributor to the field." A contributor to the field. The words echoed in Fatima's mind that evening as she sat at her desk in the small spare bedroom that Yusuf had converted into a study space for her. Around her were stacks of textbooks, notebooks filled with her careful handwriting, and printouts of research papers related to her own work. On the wall above the desk hung a framed copy of the first page of her soon-to-be published paper, a novel approach to fluid dynamic differential equations by Fatima Khan. She ran her fingers over the glass, tracing the letters of her name. 6 months ago, she had been invisible in the halls of the mathematics department, a shadow with a cleaning cart who disappeared into the background. Now her name would appear in a respected academic journal, her ideas contributing to the field she had loved from afar for so long. There was a gentle knock at the door, and Yusuf appeared with a cup of tea. "Still studying?" he asked, setting the cup beside her. "Just thinking," she replied, smiling up at him, "about how much has changed." He rested his hand on her shoulder, his eyes taking in the books, the papers, the framed article. "You know what hasn't changed?" he asked softly. "Your brilliance. That was always there. The only difference is now the world can see what I've always seen." Fatima covered his hand with hers, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support through this transformation. "Professor Williams called today," she said after a moment. "He wants me to present our research at the Applied Mathematics Conference next month, in Chicago." Yusuf's face lit up with pride. "That's wonderful." "Your first conference presentation." "It's terrifying," Fatima admitted, "standing in front of all those mathematicians trying to explain my ideas. Ideas that solved a problem they couldn't solve," Yusuf reminded her gently. "Ideas that got published in their journal. Ideas that made Professor Williams want to share your work with the wider mathematical community." He was right, of course. That valued what she had to offer. As Fatima sipped her tea and turned back to her studies, she thought about the joke that had started it all. One dismissive comment, one moment of courage, and her life had changed course like a river, finding a new channel. She still had so much to learn, so many challenges ahead. But for the first time, she was walking a path that had always been meant for her, guided by the numbers that had whispered to her since childhood, and she was no longer invisible. 2 years later, Fatima stood at the podium in Riverside University's largest lecture hall, looking out at the sea of faces before her. The room was packed. Students, professors, and even some local news reporters filled every available seat. A banner hung above the entrance. Annual Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series, Fatima Khan. She took a deep breath, remembering how far she had come. From cleaning these very floors to standing here now, giving the prestigious lecture that typically featured renowned visiting scholars, the journey still felt unreal sometimes. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Thank you all for coming today. I've been asked to share not only my research but also my journey in mathematics. It's a path that has been unconventional to say the least." A gentle ripple of laughter spread through the audience. Many knew her story by now. It had been featured in the university newsletter and even picked up by some national education publications. "The Cleaning Lady Mathematician," one headline had called her, a title that made Fatima cringe even as she recognized its attention-grabbing value. "But before I talk about differential equations or fluid dynamics," she continued, "I want to talk about visibility, about being seen." The audience grew quiet, attentive. "For 3 years I moved through these buildings like a ghost. I emptied your trash cans. I mopped your floors. I cleaned your whiteboards, sometimes reluctantly when they contained particularly beautiful equations." More laughter, warmer this time. "I was invisible to most of you. And that's not a criticism. It's simply how our world often works. We see job titles, uniforms, roles, not necessarily the complete human beings inhabiting them." Fatima glanced toward the front row where Yusuf sat, beaming with pride. Beside him were their children, Aliyah, who had flown in from Boston where she was now in medical school, and Tariq, who had taken time off from his job in engineering to be here today. What changed for me wasn't just solving an equation, though that was certainly the catalyst. What changed was being seen, really seen, for the first time in this environment, not as a cleaning lady but as a mathematician. She clicked to her first slide, displaying the now famous equation that had started it all. This problem, which many of you will recognize, became a turning point, not just in my personal journey but in our understanding of certain fluid dynamic behaviors under specific conditions. For the next 45 minutes, Fatima led the audience through her research, explaining how her initial solution had expanded into a broader theoretical framework with practical applications in climate modeling and aerodynamics. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had presented at a dozen conferences by now, who had published 3 papers, who had earned her bachelor's degree in record time and was now halfway through a master's program with a full scholarship. But more meaningful than the academic content was what happened after the formal lecture. During the question and answer session, a young woman in a hijab stood up. "Mrs. Khan, your story has inspired so many of us who come from non-traditional backgrounds. What advice would you give to someone who doesn't fit the typical profile of a mathematician, but loves the field?" Fatima smiled. "Trust your passion. If numbers speak to you, listen, regardless of what others think your relationship with mathematics should be. And remember that there's no single path to becoming a mathematician. My route was circuitous, to say the least, but it still led me here." An older man rose next, identifying himself as a high school math teacher from a neighboring town. "I've been using your story to inspire my students, particularly girls who don't see themselves represented in STEM fields. Has the response to your journey been entirely positive, or have you faced skepticism as well?" A fair question. Fatima nodded thoughtfully before answering. "The truth is, not everyone believed in me initially. Some assumed my solution was a fluke, or that I had somehow memorized it without understanding the principles. Others questioned whether the university's support was more about public relations than academic merit." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I learned is that you cannot wait for everyone to believe in you before you believe in yourself. Yes, I faced skepticism. I still do sometimes. But for every doubter, there have been many more supporters, people who saw potential in me and helped nurture it." The questions continued, ranging from technical inquiries about her research to personal ones about balancing family life with academic pursuits. Fatima answered them all with the same thoughtful honesty, neither downplaying the challenges nor exaggerating her accomplishments. When the formal event ended, people gathered around her, waiting to speak with her one-on-one. Among them was David, the student whose joke had inadvertently changed her life. He had graduated now and was working on his PhD at another university, but had returned specifically for her lecture. "Mrs. Khan," he said when his turn came. I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. What happened that night? My thoughtless comment. It's been both the most embarrassing and most eye-opening moment of my life. Fatima smiled warmly. We all have moments that teach us, David. What matters is what we learn from them. I've learned a lot, he said earnestly. About assumptions. About hidden talent. About who gets to be a mathematician. He hesitated, then added, Your work on the Peterson-Kahn method is actually helping with my dissertation research now. The Peterson-Kahn method. She still felt a thrill whenever she heard the name that had been given to her approach. Her name alongside that of the theorist whose work had inspired her. It was a kind of immortality in the mathematical world, to have your name attached to a method or theorem. Later that evening, the mathematics department hosted a small reception in her honor. As Fatima moved through the room, accepting congratulations and engaging in conversations about research and teaching, she noticed a woman in a cleaning uniform quietly emptying the trash cans along the wall. Excusing herself from a conversation with the dean, Fatima walked. I'm Fatima, she said, extending her hand. I used to do your job here. Recognition dawned in the woman's eyes. Oh, you're the one they're celebrating today. The mathematician. I've heard about you. Fatima nodded. What's your name? Rosa, the woman replied, shaking Fatima's hand. It's nice to meet you, Rosa. Are you interested in any particular subjects? Beyond your work here, I mean. Rosa hesitated, then admitted. I love reading about history, actually. Ancient civilizations especially. I read everything I can find about Egypt and Mesopotamia. Really? Fatima's interest was genuine. That's fascinating. Have you ever thought about studying it formally? Rosa laughed softly. At my age? With my job and my kids? It seems impossible. Fatima smiled, remembering how she had once felt the same way. Nothing is impossible, Rosa. Difficult, yes, but not impossible. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, something she still couldn't quite believe she had. If you ever want to talk about possibilities, call me. The university has programs for non-traditional students. I'd be happy to help you navigate them. Rosa accepted the card with a surprise thank you, tucking it carefully into her pocket before continuing with her work. When Fatima rejoined the reception, Professor Williams was waiting for her with a glass of sparkling water. I saw that, he said, nodding toward Rosa. You're paying it forward already. It seems like the least I can do, Fatima replied. You took a chance on me when you could have just enjoyed the moment and then let me go back to being invisible. Professor Williams shook his head. I didn't take a chance on you, Fatima. I simply recognized what was already there, a brilliant mathematical mind that deserved nurturing. He raised his glass slightly. And speaking of recognition, I have some news. The hiring committee met yesterday. They want to offer you an adjunct teaching position for next fall, while you finish your master's, with a path to a full-time position once you complete your PhD. Fatima nearly spilled her drink. A teaching position? Here? Where else? He said with a smile. You're already something of a legend in our department, and more importantly, you're an excellent mathematician with a unique perspective on education and accessibility. We need voices like yours in academia. A teaching position, a path to a PhD. Her name on a door in this very building, perhaps not far from where she had once pushed her cleaning cart. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. As the evening wound down, Fatima found herself standing by the large windows overlooking the campus, momentarily alone with her thoughts. Outside lights illuminated the pathways where students hurried to evening classes or study sessions, their futures still unfolding. Yusuf appeared at her side, slipping his arm around her waist. Penny for your thoughts, Professor Kahn? She laughed softly at the title she didn't yet have. I was just thinking about that night. The joke, the equation, how small moments can change everything. He nodded, following her gaze out the window. And what about the future? Professor Williams told me their offer. Will you accept? Fatima was quiet for a moment, considering. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more doubters, more moments of imposter syndrome that no amount of success seemed able to fully banish. But there would also be students, perhaps some like her, with unexpected backgrounds and unconventional journeys. Students who needed to see that mathematics wasn't just for those who fit a certain profile or followed a traditional path. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I will." As they left the reception hand in hand, walking across the campus that had transformed from her workplace to her academic home, Fatima thought about all the equations still waiting to be solved, all the patterns still waiting to be discovered, and about all the people still waiting to be truly seen, their hidden talents recognized and valued. Her story wasn't just about mathematics. It was about potential, about what happens when someone finally looks beyond surface appearances and sees the brilliance that might be hidden underneath. One small